of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
Amen.
Well, I want to tell you about a pair of jeans. I don't know why we say pair. That's what we say. We say a pair of jeans. I'm going to tell you about a pair of jeans. And this isn't just any pair of jeans. This is my favorite pair of jeans. I wore them back when I was 18 or 19, and the only thing I really cared about was playing music. I actually sort of borrowed them, as weird as this sounds, I actually sort of borrowed them from another musician friend of mine and just never gave them back. I played in a few bands around town, around Nashville, and kind of settled in with a good friend of mine from high school, and we started writing music together, and things started to kind of click musically. We gathered a few more guys and started playing shows in smaller venues downtown. We play on Fridays or Saturdays, and I'd go work at UPS, in the middle of the night on the other days. And we started to hang around a few other bands that were kind of doing the same thing. Well, he moved in with a group of guys that all played together in this small house off of Broadway. And the common thread, even though we were all playing different kinds of music, the common thread was, of course, that we were trying to make it, right? We were trying to break out, trying to get a record deal. And I borrowed this one pair of jeans, this sort of, the jeans that you have to have if you're going to be a successful rock musician. They're perfectly frayed in the perfect spots. They sort of look like someone had ripped them up and kind of started to use them as rags in their garage, and then sort of changed their mind about halfway through and made them back into jeans. Shortly after this particular time in my life, I kind of gave it all up, right? I gave up the idea of becoming a rock star, started feeling called towards ministry instead. But the guy I borrowed the jeans from, he kept at it, and he actually moved to New York City, and he sort of kind of became big. He got a record deal, and you hear him on the radio every now and then. And his band tours all over the world. So now I've just been keeping these jeans and hoping that he makes them really big, and I can sell them on eBay. So I tell you all this to tell you this. I tried to wear these jeans again the other day. I tried to, I put them on, I lost a little bit of weight. I was like, I'm ready. I can break them back out, right? They're way back in the closet, dug them out, put them on, got really excited. They look ridiculous. They fit, I'm happy to say, but they don't quite have the same effect on a 35-year-old father of three that they did on the 18-year-old musician. I'm no longer the same person. No longer that person that I used to be. I can try and put myself back into that time of my life, but it's just not going to happen. You can't really ever go back to who you were. For those who have taken on the task at some point in their spiritual walk of reading the Bible from start to finish, from the very first chapters of Genesis to the very last words of Revelation. Most people that take on this task have a common observation once they get about to the book of Deuteronomy, which we just read from. They've gotten through the narrative text of Genesis. They're digging into these stories of God's sustaining power in the lives of individuals and their families. They hear the first instances of the concept of a covenant with Abraham and his descendants. Then they move from Genesis, they go to Exodus, and they hear about God's sustaining power in the lives of a people group, right? The Israelites. Now God takes them through plagues and releases them from captivity, breaks them out of their prison, takes them into the desert and says, I'm going to be your God, and you're going to be my people. Gives them promises. Same promises that he made back to Abraham in Genesis. He gives them promises, says, I will bless you. I'll bless you if you keep my law. Then the adventurous reader, right, gives from Exodus, and they move into the book of Leviticus, and things get a little rough. You're hearing clean and unclean. You're hearing about blood sacrifices and food offerings and all the countless ways that one can be defiled and unable to come into the presence of God. A little slow going. But the book of Numbers comes next. In the book of Numbers, you are gifted once again with narrative history. Here are stories again, which is nice. Finally smashed. God has taken up residence with his people. His presence is there with him in the tabernacle. And they're moving. They're moving towards the promised land. But God says this. He says, okay, wait, everybody, hold on. Who all's here? We got to count the people, right? We have to have a census. Count everybody, make sure everybody is present. It's the perpetual action of every parent of more than a couple of kids, right? Everywhere we go, it's like, okay, wait, 1, 2, 3, okay, we're good. Then the reader moves from Numbers into Deuteronomy, which we just heard from. And the book of Deuteronomy, after you read the first 4 books, you get to the book of Deuteronomy, and it's curious thing starts to happen. You read, and all of a sudden you kind of have this deja vu moment. Wait a minute, I think I heard this before. I think I read this already. You're the same, stories, the same promises, maybe the same warnings that you read about, 3 or 4 weeks ago if you're doing the 1-year Bible. And you go back and check your 1-year Bible calendar. Day 46 is where I'm supposed to be. This is right. But the book of Deuteronomy is very much a revisitation of the promises that were made to the first generation of Israelites. That's the reason why a lot of it sounds like it's something maybe you heard back in Exodus. So you remember the first generation comes out of Egypt, right? And they, are very excited to move towards the promised land. They get right to the edge of it, and what do? I don't know. There's people here already. There's fortified cities. There's people with weapons. It's going to be harder than we thought it was going to be. So they refuse to go in. Their courage fails them, and they just don't want to do it. So the book of Deuteronomy picks up right after this first generation who escaped Egypt and refused to go in has all died. There's this beautiful verse, I think it's found in Numbers. I say beautiful. God says this, you know what? Every one of your carcasses will fall in the wasteland. This is a very ominous warning, right? This is what's going to happen. This is the judgment that's coming to you because you wouldn't take hold of the promises that I've given. But here's the deal. Even though this harsh judgment fell upon that first group, that did not mean that God was done with Israel. Deuteronomy, the whole book, is actually a book of seconds. The word actually comes from Latin deuteros and nomos, second law. So it's the second giving of the law. Why? Why would we have to give it a second time? It's because it's to the kids this time. That whole first generation has died off. God is actually speaking to this second generation. He's giving them a second chance. Revealing to his people for a second time all the promises that he made to their ancestors and that are valid for them. But they have to make the decision. The faith of their parents is not good enough. They have to make the decision. So as you're reading this book, you'll hear some of the same words and phrases, the same possibilities, the same cautions, the same blessings, and the same curses that God spoke through Moses in the book of Exodus. I like to say that this book is very much a recalling and a reaffirmation of those promises. It's not just a deja vu moment. This is not just history recounted. These covenantal promises are being made anew. So So again, these promises and these blessings that God is pronouncing, they're being brought forward to the present. God is saying this isn't just something that, was because I liked your dad and your mom. This is being brought forward. This is grace in the moment. They had to hear it again. They had to hear it again. They had to see it with their own eyes. They had to handle it with their own fingertips. They had to hear it with their own ears the ways that God will sustain them. God will bless them if they follow Him, if they keep His law. It's like a new visitation. They couldn't go back. They couldn't redo, all the actions. They couldn't fix the mistakes that their parents had made. Those moments were over. You can't go back and get into those jeans again, right? That moment is gone. You can't do it. They're not those people any longer. But the thing about it is, they couldn't go back, but the promises of God could come forward. Meeting them in the moment. Providing renewed grace and mercy for exactly where they were. We've been talking the last 3 weeks now about the Eucharist, about communion. And as we've gone through the gospel and kind of had this, this story of the feeding of the 5,000 and God, or Jesus talking about the manna from heaven given to the in the Exodus to the Israelites. We hear about it again this morning in the gospel. The manna that comes down from heaven. He says, hey, your forefathers ate the manna and they died. That was bread from God's hand. That was food from heaven. And they died. The only way that you're going to have sustaining everlasting life is if you partake of the bread of life. And that's me, he says. We can't go back. We can't go back, but we can understand the promises of God for this moment. So the Eucharist for us is a revisitation. It's a recalling of the actions of Christ. Father Lloyd's going to come up in a few minutes and talk about the very first part of the liturgy of the table, the words of the institution. When Jesus, with his friends, sat around the table and he took the bread and he said, this is my body, and he broke it and he said, do this. We can't go back. We have to leave all the stuff in the past in the past. If you're like me, you tend to kind of glorify moments in the past, right? Maybe it was your high school days, maybe it was your early 20s, or maybe it was when your kids were small, or the moments when your health was better, all these ways that we kind of go back and say, oh, if I could just go back. But we can't. We can't. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong about looking back and maybe having some nostalgia about what happened in the past. But we have to remember that God meets us here where we are. He has a work for us to do in this moment. There's grace and there's promises for us exactly where we are here in the present. God gives us the sustaining grace that we need for the work that we're placed on earth here to accomplish. So when we partake of the Eucharist, it is this beautiful remembrance of what God has done, but it's also so much more than a simple memorial. This is the active, living presence of Christ coming forward to meet us right here, right now. This is the living presence of God in our midst. His grace meets us in the Sabbath. Let us pray as we move to the table. Oh God, fill our hearts with joy at the very thought of you. Bring us a renewed sense of all your promises given to us as we partake of the Blessed Sacrament. We may spend our days with purpose and devotion to your service. Through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.